On December 11, 1941, a tiny American outpost in the Pacific did something Japan did not expect. It made the Imperial Japanese Navy turn around. 3 days after Pearl Harbor, while the United States was still counting its dead, Wake Island fired back with a handful of guns, a few broken aircraft, and men who had no realistic way out. Wake was not a city. It was an atoll, a thin ring of coral in the middle of the Pacific, sitting between Hawaii and Asia. It had a runway under construction, some coastal guns, a marine garrison, Navy personnel, and more than 1,000 civilian contractors building America's forward base. On a map, it looked small, but in December 1941, small places mattered. Japan had just smashed Pearl Harbor. It was moving across the Pacific with terrifying speed. Guam, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, one after another. Allied positions were being hit before Washington could even understand the scale of the disaster. Wake was supposed to be next. The first bombs came on December 8th, Wake time. The same wave of war that had struck Pearl Harbor now reached the atoll. Japanese bombers destroyed most of the Marine fighter planes on the ground. The defenders lost aircraft, supplies, and the illusion that help would arrive quickly. But they did not lose their nerve. Major James Devereaux and the Marines had coast defense guns positioned across the islets. These were not modern miracle weapons. They were heavy, exposed, and depended on discipline. If the crews fired too early, they would waste their surprise. If they waited too long, the Japanese could land. So they waited. On December 11th, the Japanese invasion force came in before dawn. Cruisers, destroyers, patrol boats, transports enough force to crush an isolated coral outpost. The Japanese expected resistance. They did not expect a trap. The American guns stayed silent until the ships moved closer. Then Wake opened fire. One shell hit the destroyer Hayate. It detonated with terrifying speed and sank within minutes. This was not just another ship lost at sea. It was the first Japanese surface warship sunk by American forces in the war. That mattered because for 3 days, the Pacific had heard only one story. Japan attacks, America retreats. Now, Wake had changed the sentence. Then the surviving Marine Wildcats joined the fight. These fighter planes were few, damaged, and operating from a battered strip. But they attacked again and again. Captain Henry Elrod helped sink another destroyer. Kisaragi. After a bomb set off its depth charges, 2 destroyers were gone. The landing was stopped. The invasion force withdrew. For Americans listening from far away, Wake Island became something larger than itself. It was proof that Pearl Harbor had not broken everyone. Somewhere in the Pacific, Marines and civilians were still standing on coral and making Japan pay. But heroism does not solve distance, and Wake was very far from rescue. A relief force was organized from Hawaii. It carried reinforcements and supplies. For a moment, it looked possible that Wake might be saved. But the Pacific after Pearl Harbor was confusion wrapped in fear. American commanders worried about Japanese carriers. They worried about losing more ships. They worried that one small island could become a trap for a much larger rescue force. So the relief force was turned back. That was the coldest part of the story. The men on Wake did not know it at first, but the door behind them had closed. Japan understood the lesson of December 11th. The second attack would not be careless. This time, the invasion came with heavier support, including carriers that had just taken part in the Pearl Harbor operation. By December 23rd, Wake had almost no air defense left. The remaining pilots became infantry. The guns were battered. The men were exhausted. The civilians, many of them construction workers, had been pulled into the defense because there was no rear area anymore. There was only Wake. Before dawn, Japanese landing forces came ashore in darkness. Patrol boats ran onto the reef. Troops spread across the atoll. The defenders fought in small pockets with rifles, machine guns, pistols, and whatever position still held. In some places, the Japanese were stopped. In others, they kept coming. And once enemy troops were on the island in numbers, the problem changed. Wake was no longer sinking ships offshore. It was trying to survive hand to hand across a flat strip of coral with no depth, no reserves, and no rescue. By morning, Commander Winfield Cunningham faced a decision every commander fears. Keep fighting and lose everyone, or surrender and live with the white flag. Wake surrendered on December 23rd. The island fell. But the legend did not. Because Wake was never important, only because it held. It was important because it held when almost everything else seemed to be falling. For 16 days, a small garrison forced Japan to spend ships, planes, time, and pride on a place it thought would collapse in hours. The flag finally came down, but before it did, Wake Island had already sent one message across the Pacific. America could be surprised, it could be wounded, but it would not be easy to remove.